Okay, good morning, everybody, and welcome to our quarterly webinar. Today we have two speakers that will be sharing with us information on cover crops. We have Dr. Mary Dronowski, who will be speaking first. She is a beef systems specialist with the University of Nebraska-Lincoln. Mary is a beef cattle nutritionist with expertise in forage production systems and is a part of an interdisciplinary team evaluating economical systems for integrated crop and livestock production in Nebraska. Her current research and extension program is focused on the utilization of crop residues and cover crops for forage and subsequent impacts on cropping systems. And our second speaker we have today is Jim Paulson from the University of Minnesota. Jim is an associate extension professor with the University of Minnesota. Jim grew up on a diversified crop and livestock farm in southeast Minnesota. He received both his Bachelor and Master of Science degrees from the University of Minnesota in animal science with a minor in agronomy, and did PhD work at Minnesota as well. He is currently a statewide dairy extension educator and focuses on nutrition and forages. He is also a member of the forage team and contributes expertise in nutrition and grazing. His research focuses on improved forage systems and sustainability for livestock systems. Jim's research is in areas of forage, NFD digestibility of alfalfa, grasses, cover crops, and corn silage, and has presented at American Dairy Science Association as well as extension meetings and conferences. Jim also co-leads on the I-29 Dairy Extension Consortium, the Minnesota Nutrition Conference, and the Midwest Forage Association Board of Directors. So welcome to everyone joining on the webinar, and welcome to both our speakers. And now I will turn it over to Dr. Dronowski. Thank you, Mary.
Well, thank you, Kim. I hope everybody can hear me and see my slides. So today I was going to talk a little bit about really integrating cover crops into cropping systems, as well as show you a little bit of data from a farm that I've been working with. As Kim pointed out, I am a beef specialist, but I will try to point out things that I think from the dairy perspective might be useful. And There, now it started working, sorry. So the first thing I wanted to discuss, while I'm not a soil scientist, I think we're realizing more and more that as we look at the effects of various management strategies in cropping systems, we realize that a lot of the management impacts have to do with how they affect the soil. And so we talk a lot about soil health. You hear that a lot on various conversations, and it's all over the web. And really it's all about the soil's ability to function. And so there's a lot of functions that the soils do for us in sustaining plants and animals. And I think we've concentrated a lot on chemical properties and physical properties and not as much on the biological properties. And we're learning that all of the functions are impacted by the biology in the soil. And so I wanted to show you a little bit of data from a study from a bunch of producers' farms in Nebraska for some reason. There we go, a bunch of producers' farms in Nebraska where we were actually evaluating the impacts of their use of cover crops on the soil biology. For some reason. And so this particular bit of information is from 17 different producers' fields in which they were either using cover crops for 1 year or less or 4 years or more. And hold on one second. And they were there we go. And they basically were in a corn soybean rotation, and they either use cover crops for 4 or more years, which is this column, or 1 or less years. And bottom line here is that in all of the microbial populations, they saw a significant increase in total microbial biomass in the bacteria, in the fungi, as well as in the diversity of the bacteria. So this was actually a PLFA test, which was done at Ward Labs, and it basically just looks at the fatty acids that are in the microbial cell walls to be able to classify those microbes. And the interesting thing here is that this should result in an improvement in nutrient cycling, an improvement in soil stable aggregates, and these AMF, our muscular mycorrhiza, have actually been shown to they associate with plant roots and actually extend the plant's ability to uptake nutrients and water. And so what we're seeing is that indeed cover crops can have beneficial impacts on the biology, which then should affect the chemical and physical properties of the soil. And I thought I would share that with you today because I think regardless of your cropping system, I think we can see benefits of cover crops from a soil perspective, which hopefully will result in improvements in crop productivity and thus the bottom line. So what I wanted to talk about is how to make cover crops work in your system. And as we think about that, what we have to first consider is how many growing degree days you're going to be able to capitalize on. And so what I have here is really the growing degree days at a base 32, which would be for our cool seasons. Most of you are used to base 50, which would be for warm seasons. And then we have basically various dates over the summer and fall. And what I want you to get out of this particular data is that as you go into the summer and later into the fall, those growing degree days rapidly decrease. And so as we think about what you might be able to plant, planting date has a huge effect on whether or not you're going to be successful in getting a cover crop up and viable. And so if we think about corn and soybeans, dry corn or soybeans, we really see that there's not many growing degree days left in the fall. And so really looking for any type of fall growth is going to be minimal. But when we get into corn silage ground, there's opportunity to produce fall growth, which as a nutritionist, as a beef nutritionist, I look at that as forage. But we can plant after early harvested corn silage, August 25th to the 1st of September, we can get some substantial fall growth. After that date, we're really looking at, in this mid-September to late September, we're really looking at thinking about spring forage. And so I think Jim's going to talk a little bit about how to incorporate some of that spring forage into dairy rations. But what I wanted to show you is first the impact of growing degree days. And so this is a daikon oilseed radish, a purple top turnip. They were planted on August 25th. And then 10 days later, basically on September 8th, again, we had those same purple top turnip, daikon oilseed radish planted. And you can see there's a huge difference in the amount of growth that we got just in those 10 days, which comes back to the amount of growing degree days that are accumulating. And so the earlier you can plant, the more fall production you're going to get. If your goal is fall production, you have to get in right away. And I just wanted to show you really what that looked like on this graph. And so if we look at that August 25th planting date, the growing degree days were about 1,800 growing degree days. If we look then at backing it up to that September 8th date, you see we lost a fourth of our growing degree days. Now we're only at about 1,300. And so every day is a substantial impact on the amount of fall growth that you're going to get. Thus, your species selection should be based off of planting date first and foremost. And so I have on this slide before August 10th, really that's going to be if you have small grains in the crop rotation. But for most of you, you're probably looking at after corn silage, you might be able to get something in late August, early September. And with those planting dates, winter-sensitive, cool season species are going to give you the most biomass and thus the most bang for your buck. The two that I particularly look at are oats and brassicas. They can produce quite a bit of biomass. Those brassicas are very cheap, but when we're thinking about fall forage, we also need some grass. And I'm going to show you that with these fall forages, these may be an opportunity for you to think about utilizing these as forage sources for growing heifers in particular. So for your developing heifers, these may be a great option. After about September 10th, so that's a lot of corn silage ground, you just don't have the ability to grow much in the fall. So you just want to get something to provide some cover and reduce erosion, and then think about spring production. And so what we're really looking at there is your traditional winter hardy cool seasons, rye and triticale. Now, I'll make a point here that I'm talking about looking at biomass production, and the grasses always win in terms of biomass production. There are other goals with cover crops, and that may change species selection. So you might add in other species for other goals. But if you're thinking about biomass, purely just trying to get more carbon production and more cover, grasses always produce the most biomass. Now, I wanted to show you what we have been able to achieve in terms of growth on calves in the fall with those oat brassica mixes. So I have 5 data sets here where we planted either the 15th of August, which would be after these wheat, or we planted late August or very early September, which would be these 3. And I wanted to show you the yields we were getting were about 1 to 2 tons of biomass per acre. We were able to stock calves at 1 to 2 calves per acre, depending on that biomass, get about 60 days of grazing, and get average daily gains that range between 1.3 and 2 pounds a day, which if you look at the economics, the cost of this forage, it's fairly hard to beat, especially with harvested forages. So this was all grazing, and in my mind, these may be some opportunities for you to consider as you're thinking about cost-effective ways to background, or in this case, develop heifers. Now, I did want to show you some nutrient content, and I realize that you may not think in TDN. NEL is not all that different from TDN numbers, but you can get the general idea here that as we look at the brassicas, so radishes or turnips, and the oats in the fall, what we see is we get very high protein levels, 20 to 25% crude protein, very high energy levels, TDNs that run from 80 to 70%. And we also see that they maintain very well even going into the winter. So when we think about November, this is the 1st of November and the 1st of December, we do not see that they deteriorate very rapidly. And so you can graze into the winter on these forages. Even though they look brown and quite ugly, they're still quite high quality. I do want to point out 2 other things, and that is the fiber and the sulfur. And so as we look at the brassicas, they're relatively low fiber and high sulfur. And that's why we do not suggest grazing brassicas alone or feeding brassicas alone. You need a grass in there to bring up the fiber in the diet and dilute out some of the sulfur. And I would say the same holds true if you were thinking about a cover crop and harvesting that to feed to animals in any system, that you're going to need some more fiber in that diet. So I wanted to show you a picture just of what those forages look like with those high qualities. This was in November 6th when that first sample was taken, and this was December 9th when that second sample was taken. And you can see that it doesn't look very high quality at December 9th, but it did maintain it quite well. And so we can be able to have forage that lasts through the winter, even if it doesn't look very appetizing. Now, the other thing I wanted to talk about was thinking about the planting of these winter hardy species. And so this is actually some data from Iowa. It was South Iowa, South Central Iowa, where they were looking at the effect of planting date. And I have taken the growing degree days at which they planted and converted them to Nebraska growing degree days, so you can actually see how it applies to you. But basically, what we have here is that planting in late August or early September, depending on whether you're in Southeast or the rest of Nebraska, that we really don't get additional spring growth by that early planting, really until we get to September 18th for most of Nebraska, September 29th for Southeast. We have no real additional benefit of planting earlier in the fall in terms of spring growth, but you will get a little bit more fall growth. But after that date, we start decreasing in our spring growth. And you can see that by October 10th, we're about 80% of the potential spring yield. However, it's still 80% of the potential spring yield. So even with this very late planting, we can still get quite a bit of spring forage production. And so I think there are great options, even on corn ground that's harvested for dry corn, or on bean ground, to be able to incorporate spring forages, particularly when we think about the opportunity before soybeans in that relatively long window. You know, if you're not going to plant soybeans until mid-May to the 1st of June, there's an opportunity there to produce quite a bit of biomass with these spring winter hardy species. The other thing I wanted to point out before I talked a little bit more about biomass is that with these cover crops, a lot of the benefits happen because of the roots. And so I was amazed. I was out in Grand Island and we took some cores in some 3-inch tall rye that was planted into bean ground. And the root of that rye in early March was almost 31 inches down in the ground. And so as we think about the benefits, what you see happening above ground doesn't always tell the story about what's happening below ground. Now, as a ruminant nutritionist, I think about the top growth and the benefits it can have for cattle, but there are additional benefits that happen due to just the roots. And honestly, as we think about accumulating organic matter, looking at the data, we find that the majority, almost 70% of that organic matter benefits come from the roots. And so don't dismiss that 3-inch tall rye out there as a benefit. I think it's doing a lot more than we give it credit for. So I wanted to talk about yield and quality of winter cereals and really how that might change your selection of species. So this is some data from Fall City where we planted Elbon rye, variety non-stated, which is probably a northern rye, winter barley, and winter triticale. And then on April 8th, we did yield estimates and quality estimates. And the bottom line here is that if you're looking for really early forage production, Elbon rye is going to be the winner every time. It's because it's a southern rye. It gets started earlier in the spring. It starts coming out of dormancy and growing faster than your northern rye do, and that's why you see this difference here in biomass. Now, with that being said, it also means that it reaches maturity more quickly and will get lower quality more quickly. So if you're looking to incorporate something into the system and be able to then plant early with your next crop, Elbon rye is probably going to be your winner. If you want to be able to maintain quality longer, such as in a grazing scenario, then you may want to think about incorporating something like winter triticale, which matures a little later but yields very well, or even having some winter barley in that system. Although it does yield a very low, that's because it's really slow to take off and it will maintain its quality a lot longer. But you can see that as we look at this April 8th date, that even with this very high quality components, all of them are really high. High protein, 20% crude protein, and 70 to 74% TDN. And so really, even though we have a little bit lower TDN with Elbon, we still have yields of TDN and protein that are the highest with the Elbon. So I do want you to think about variety in addition to species selection and think about what your goals are. And this is just a picture of what that looked like in April 8th. And you can see this is the variety non-stated planted right beside the Elbon. And you can see there is quite a bit of difference in growth. And so if you were going to go in and harvest at that point in time and then want to plant corn, for instance, Elbon would have been probably better. Now I wanted to show you a little bit of data from First Nebraska, where we've been working with a dairy, actually planting cover crops after corn silage. And the first year in 2014, we planted oats, rye, radish, and actually broadleaf mustard. And by the end of October, we had 2 tons of forage that was very high quality, 24% crude protein, 70% TDN. And as you can see, in March, there was a lot of ground cover. Even though our rye did not do very well, I think it got outcompeted by our large amount of growth that we got out of the radishes, mustard, and oats. We still had a lot of ground cover, and so we would not have had erosion. The interesting thing is, this is a picture from those same crops. This was in December, and we had plots where we did not plant the cover crop, and you can see that that cover crop was trapping snow, and where we didn't have the cover crop, the snow ended up in the road ditch here. And so we talk a lot about worrying about use of moisture with cover crops, and in this case, we may have actually been able to trap winter water and have it available in the spring, because these were all winter sensitive and they did end up killing out. So there's something to consider in your system about which you choose based off of what your goals are. Now, the other thing I wanted to show you was we did look at the effect of the cover on our corn silage yield. And so this is the bushels of grain in the corn silage and the corn silage dry matter yield. I've lost my. And so you can see that we did end up having a loss of some tons of corn silage and some bushels of grain. And the main reason why we did see this, we believe, is because we were tying up some nutrients that weren't available. And if we were, this particular field relies heavily on manure nutrients, and so we probably needed to think about having some nutrients applied earlier in the growing season for the corn to overcome some of the tie-up that we had with those cover crops. Now, I wanted to show you, this is that same date in December, but they saw all that forage out there and they said, boy, we should make use of it. So they did go through and cut it and windrow it. And they ended up harvesting it about 3 weeks after they had cut it. It still had not dried. And this is the problem with trying to make silage in that late in the fall. It didn't want to dry out. But because it maintained the cold temperature, they actually were able to feed it. It didn't go bad, and it was actually very high quality forage. Like I showed you earlier, those oats and brassicas in the fall are very, very high quality. I would caution about the high sulfur content and tainting of milk in terms of that sulfur coming through in the milk, but they did make that work. Again, I think the best opportunity here is for grazing some developing heifers. The next year, we planted a similar mix, but really what we did is have some rape instead of the broadleaf mustard, because we did have broadleaf mustard seed that ended up overwintering and had not sprouted and then came up during the cropping season. So we decided to go with rape in the second year. In late September, we had about 1 ton of dry matter. By the end of October, we had about 2 tons, like we did the first year. I do want to point out that in this high nutrient system, the rape and the radish did very, very well and was the majority of the biomass that was produced. And so would have been really high quality feed. And again, we did end up harvesting that, and they did end up feeding it. I did want to show you what the energy contents look like. You know, they were somewhere in the high 70s, and protein was extremely high in late September. This protein would have came down a little bit into the 20s by the time we harvested in October. Now, I did want to show you the second year we added plots where they did harvest the cover crop, and I wanted to show you the difference in March. And you can see that by harvesting, they did allow that rye to come through and actually do a little better in the spring. So I do think it was a competition effect. We had too much fall growth. So if you're thinking about trying to get fall growth and spring growth, there is a balance that you have to think about. I also wanted to show you what the field looked like where we did not plant cover crop, and there's a lot of henbit in these plots. And so nature will plant something if we don't. So in my mind, do you want weed seed or do you want something that you can manage? Now, all of that, I wanted to show you the impacts of these 2 years of the cover crop and the 1 year of harvesting the cover crop on some of the soil properties, in particular the physical properties. So this is the aggregation of the soil, basically how large the soil aggregates were and how stable. And you can see there's no statistical differences among the treatments, either at 0 to 4 inch depth or 4 to 8. But the trend is that we're seeing some numerical positive effects in soil stable aggregates, which should affect water infiltration. And so that's the next measure I wanted to show you, is water infiltration. And this is the rate of infiltration here. And we have our control, our cover crop, and where they harvested the cover crop. This was taken this spring. And you see the control, we have a lot lower water infiltration rates. The initial water infiltration was quite high. The soil was dry at that time, and you can see it was almost 12 inches per hour, but very quickly got down to a steady state that was about 2 inches per hour. By adding the cover crop in the system, even if it was harvested, we see that that steady state was now about 7 inches per hour. So there was a significant effect of having cover crops in the system for 2 years on water infiltration. And this graph over here is really just looking at the cumulative water infiltration and shows you that over that hour and a half time frame that we were looking at water infiltration, there's a significant impact on how much water infiltrated into the soil total. And so we talk a lot about benefits of cover crops from the standpoint of the physical properties, and this is one of those physical properties where in the spring, where we get in the eastern part of the state in particular, we get a lot of heavy rainfall, your soil being able to actually soak that up and have that become available instead of running off, I think it's a substantial benefit. With that, I think I'll open it up to questions, and we'll see where we go from here.
Thank you, Mary. If anyone has any questions, you can feel free to unmute yourself and ask questions, or you can also type them in the Zoom chat as well. If you're on the phone, feel free to join in with questions as well. And we'll have time at the end for questions. Okay, I don't think we have any questions at this time. So Jim, I will turn it over to you, and I will let you talk more about the grazing and dairy ration side of cover crops.
All right, thank you, Kim, and thanks for the opportunity to join in with Mary and all of you at Nebraska or wherever you might be. Certainly some things are a little different, but I really appreciate what Mary presented this morning. Lots of good information there. So let's see, I got to share screen, and we're going to try to do this. Okay, are we? Okay, can everybody see that okay?
No, we don't see your screen.
Okay, that is, I wonder why. I clicked share screen. Let me, where do I go from here? I clicked on the share screen on the thing. Let's go.
Oh, we got you.
You got me.
Yes.
Okay.
Now just click on presentation mode for your PowerPoint and you should be good to go.
How's that? No. Are you seeing the presentation?
Yes. Can you make it full screen?
Oh, yes. Yes, I can. Wait a minute. It is on the other screen. Let me see if I can draw it. How about now? No.
No.
Wonder what is hindering me.
We see your horse.
See my horse. That is not what you want to see. All right. Let's go back over to, no. Now? Why am I, No. That one should be down.
I can see you working on that screen. If you go to the bottom right,
Yeah.
click on that.
And it comes up on my other, I have two screens. It comes up over here.
Okay, move that to the other screen. Move the full presentation to your other screen.
Doesn't seem to, How do I move that?
At the top, where that orange bar is on the presentation, on your other screen, just slide it to the next screen.
Because all right, let's try this again. Start share.
It's all right. The screen that you're working on, just make that presentation larger and we'll go from there.
How about that?
Yep, we'll go from there.
All right. I am sorry for, I don't know why, because it's over here. And then, all right. Let's go on here to the next. Oh no, I gotta go back here because all right, on this first screen, you're gonna see two different examples of animals grazing in some cover crops. One is for Mary's benefit, if nothing else, it's some beef animals that we worked with a farm, and that's some oats and turnips, and that is about the 10th of November that those animals are grazing. And then the other one on the right side is actually at our experiment station in Morris. And that is some BMR sorghum sedan, and we use that mainly to fill in some summer slump. And those are some dairy animals out there grazing, and so that is one of the ways that we use that in addition for cover crop and actually in a grazing system. So as we go to the next slide, then one of the things that I hear, and I mean, a lot of producers want to utilize some cover crops. The question is, can I make it work? And certainly a lot of what I've heard is I can't make it work. It doesn't work in corn and soybeans. And certainly there are some advantages in livestock systems where we're taking corn off as corn silage, and obviously that's also a greater need for a cover crop, because we got that ground pretty bare out there when we take corn silage off. We can also make that utilize some of our system where we've got manure to put on, and we want to try to capture some of that nitrate loss and things like that. So we have to ask ourselves, then, what do I need to make it work? Will it make me some money? We certainly hope it will, but there are some intrinsic benefits that maybe will it give me value, and so that may be more than just money. And how's that going to work for my land, my animals, and my goals? And some of those goals may be going beyond pure bottom line money. And certainly what we look for is how to capture some value or add value to that. And grazing or low cost forage certainly is a way to do that. And it's very beneficial and really has some pretty good economics to it, as Mary showed as well. It really helps as livestock producers and things to have livestock part of the system. We get animal productivity payback. We get forage harvest at no mechanical costs. We get building organic matter, recycling nutrients. Here's some a picture of some forage cover crop that has been growing. And for those of you who have heard of Burleigh County, North Dakota, that's where I'm standing. I'm standing on Gabe Brown's farm right there. And if we don't think we can cover crops work as part of our systems, certainly North Dakota shows that you can. And so looking at this, obviously this is a little too mature for a dairy quality. We're not going to milk cows on this kind of stuff, but dairy quality for a young stock and dry cow kind of situation certainly has some possibilities. As we go on and we look at utilizing cover crops and systems where we're going to add to our forage chain, we know that certainly pasture productivity is greatest in the cool seasons. Warm seasons, like we might see warm season grasses in Nebraska, certainly we're talking switchgrass and blue stems and things like that. But they lack the productivity in the other sides, and they also aren't quite as high a quality for dairy animals. And so we got to fill some gaps. One of the concepts to be about is building this forage chain. And as we look at the top line with the cool season perennials, essentially what we're doing on our dairy farms, on our beef farms, or goats or sheep or whatever the case might be, we got to have a year-round supply of forage. If we're grazing, then typically we have inadequate amounts in April and July and August, a little more September, October, and certainly not enough in November, December, and none in January, February, March. And so we look at where it's the highest and kind of think about this as a cash flow. And we're all familiar with doing those things, and we fill in when we're having income, when we're having expenses, and try to fill in the gaps. And essentially that's what we're going to do with our forages. And by utilizing some warm season, this would be your switchgrass, this is your blue stems over there. In some pasture situations, whether that's dry cows or heifers or whatever. Cool season annuals, again, cereal type things, oats and spring crops, winter crops could be growing in here. We could also have them growing in the fall. Warm season annuals, again, is our millets, our sorghum sedans, things like that. And that can be part of it. It can also, like in Minnesota, we have situations where we're filling gaps and also doing ground cover because we may be taking off canning crops, we may be taking off the winter wheat, we may be taking off some other things. Another thing, maybe even we're at our third or fourth year on our hay crops and the productivity is down such that is it hardly worth taking a third or a fourth cutting versus what if we went in there in the middle of August and planted an additional type of cover crop that we could also get additional forage. And whether it's a pasture plan or whether it's a forage plan, we need to think through then, let's take our cover crops to a new level of making it part of our forage plan and think about, again, setting up our forage chain and make our plan adjust. We had to do that at Morris, and that's where some of this has come from. Because if at Morris, and I'm not sure what your rainfalls are going to be in Nebraska compared to southeast Minnesota, but I know as we go across Minnesota and from northwest to southeast, we about double our rainfall. And so where I live, I might get 35, 36 inches of rainfall on the average. Whereas Morris, we were in that 15 to 18, and we found trying to graze animals, we were certainly running into gaps in especially August, just not having enough. And so we started looking at ways to improve that situation. We also started looking at ways of increasing our overall productivity of forage in the number of acres we had to work with. And so that became part of the situation. Here's, again, we have to think about then, can we utilize the cover crops in the summer or the fall, warm season, cool season? The picture on the left is actually our dairy cows grazing teff grass. Again, another way we chose to try to fill a gap, use some ground. And again, maybe this fits into your situation where we can take off a couple cuttings of forage and then we're going to redo a field. Maybe it is with a winter wheat crop or something. We need someplace to put manure during the midsummer so we can make it to fall with our storage. And so we utilize all these into the system. If we're going to graze things, and this is whether it's spring, summer, or fall, the maximum intake with pastures is in that 6 to 15 inch height. And there are other factors additionally, in addition to height, and it's how thick it is, what amount of crop we've got out there. And so we have to think about that, again, if we're going to graze some of these crops as well. If we're going to harvest them, we have to think about optimal forage quality versus yield. And again, we do that all the time when we're harvesting alfalfa. It's always a trade-off on what yield we want and what we want for forage quality. The characteristics of a productive pasture or a productive forage field are high leaf area index, high plant density, high plant diversity, pasture complexity, plant growth throughout the grazing season, and decreased unproductive plants and more perennial plants. So think about that, how we apply that to our pasture situations or our cover crop situations. And one of the things I see, again, whether this is in pasture productivity, cover crop grazing, or even in ground cover, is how much dry matter we've got per acre, how much per inch. We typically are shooting for 200-300 pounds of dry matter per inch of growth. And what I want to show not only are the differences here, but also notice this very inexpensive tool that's utilized, and that's a yardstick. And I did a pasture walk last week, talked to some producers about how they manage their pastures. Do they have any idea how much actual feed is out there, how many animals they're putting out there, what are their needs? And so we need to do some things, make some charts or make some notes to help us actually manage what we're producing and know what we have. Forage quality needs, again, as we think about feeding our dairy animals, if I'm going to harvest some cover crops, whether that's via grazing or via mowing and harvesting, putting it into baleage, putting it into a bag, whatever the case might be, what do we know? What do we need? And sometimes cover crops just are not going to be good enough for the milking cows. They might be all right for mature heifers and dry cows, and maybe that's a niche that we need to fill. Think about the 20, 30, 40. A lot of us are certainly familiar with that. The gauge for good dairy quality alfalfa at 20% protein, 4% NDF was kind of that guideline, 30% ADF. We don't use that number as much anymore, the way we analyze forage and do rations. But 20 and 40, just keep those numbers in mind, and how does that apply to a forage analysis for some cover crops? And the maturity when grazed or harvested is that biggest factor. And as Mary talked about, when we have these winter cereal rye or things like that, how that can change and change quickly in the spring. And so that can affect our forage quality. Thinking about, obviously, vegetative and boot is kind of where we need to be thinking about for getting any kind of dairy quality. When we get to these bloom and seed heads, obviously it's going down. And what happens, and I see this a lot in cereal rye more than the triticale, is that the leaf proportion declines and declines rapidly. And stems obviously are not as nutritious. Fiber concentration increases very quickly. And then obviously we just don't get as much digestibility of the NDF. We don't get as much energy out of it. So Mary covered some of these things already, and we have cool season, warm season, different things, these cereal grains, brassicas, these can all make good forage, these cool season ones especially, but so can these warm season ones over here. But one of the things I want to mention, and if you remember one of Mary's slides, she had water-soluble carbohydrates. And as you look at some of these like oats and things growing into the fall, that's different than oats growing in the spring. In the spring, and all seeds, radishes is another good example, but all these crops, their objective is to put a seed head out. And as the day length is increasing up until the 21st of June, they're growing, they put up a seed head. That's the objective of that plant. But unfortunately, that decreases forage quality really quickly. In the fall, we have a different situation. We have days getting shorter. And when we plant a spring crop like oats, say the middle of August, and we grow it into the fall, we have a situation where the oats plant is basically fooled in that the days are getting shorter. It doesn't have the trigger mechanism to put up a seed head. But what it's doing is accumulating sugars and having a very digestible plant high in sugars growing into that fall. So that's a very good forage. The other thing, as we think about, again, when we throw in some cover crops, there's a lot of talk about big diverse mixtures, whether it's 5, 10, 15 different types of things. But we have to think about, you can see here in this picture that there are things that are growing well and things that are not. And this stuff was planted on the 25th of August, and this is about the 10th of October here. And you'll notice that some things in these plots did not grow. And that's some of those warm season crops, the sorghum sedans, the teffs, a lot of these things on this side don't grow with a hoot into the cool weather versus radishes and turnips and some of these other brassicas and annual ryegrass over here where in the cool season they're growing fine and doing very well. This also could be some spring oats or things like that. So again, we need to actually plant cool season and no use putting warm season things into those time periods. Again, we're just here's an example of what the plant and when. In the upper picture here is a really good example. You can see this is a situation where we took the corn silage off, came in and planted some winter triticale, and this is really high quality forage. And we have some younger animals grazing this, and that will provide some late forage in the fall and some early forage in the spring. The bottom picture is a little different kind of a mix, and that was set up with different things. And you can see, again, where some of those crops are going to grow longer into the winter. And I thought Mary's picture was really good, where she showed some of those in December and how much green, how much forage was out there that could be utilized. So on this picture, again, we have a couple situations where on the lower right, we have some triticale. On the lower left picture here is some winter cereal rye. And as I look at the varieties I want to plant for dairy quality forage that I could harvest in the spring, I'm kind of going in a decreasing order. And winter rye is obviously showing, and there's tremendous number of acres of winter rye planted. And one thing about winter rye, if you're getting new into cover crops, winter rye is a very hardy kind of a plant. So your chances are success, if you're going to kind of wade into this cover crop side of things, winter rye is a good choice because it's somewhat forgiving on timing and it's very hardy, grows into the winter. But unfortunately, it's the first one in the spring to break out, and its objective again is to put that seed head on. And so it can decrease in forage quality very quickly. It has good options. Either one of these in some early timing, being able to get animals out first, and that might be a place to get heifers out grazing. It could be a place, certainly in the beef industry, where they can have some place to calve on clean ground, some stuff like that. But you have to watch it, and the way springs have been with the rain and stuff, sometimes we can get caught, and we have gone from dairy quality forage to dry cow bill type forage. So it has to be taken. But if we can get it boot stage or less, lay it out in wide windrows, get it off that field, we can have dairy quality. Some of my research involved looking at winter triticale and feeding to dairy cows. We compared it to alfalfa haylage, and we matched production stride for stride, feeding 100% triticale as the forage. So it is certainly possible. I think we're going to jump down here, and I want to follow this up then, looking at, here's an example of some of our yields that we've gotten. You can see the crude proteins, you can see the NDFs, and you can see the TDNs. what I want to show there, you look at forage oats, and again, it's somewhat of a characteristic of when you harvest. And so whether it's forage oats, whether it's triticale or others, the type of NDS should be, you want to hope for around 50%, and you want to get TDNs in the 60s, high 60s if possible. So you can see that the annual ryegrass, and these were all taken at 60 days from planting. We had some decent yields, increasing amounts of yields. We had some differences in NDF. We had some similarities in the TDNs. So those are certainly some possibilities. Now, just kind of looking at some of the other cover crops we might utilize and compare them, say, to your warm season grasses. And really, you want to be in this green range of TDNs to be of that dairy quality net energy kind of levels. And so it's hard to do that with warm season grasses, as you guess, the switchgrass, the blue stems, or whatever. We get to the cool season grasses like here, we can get to some of these annual grasses, and then certainly legumes when harvested correctly are right up to the clovers and the alfalfa. If we want to look at using some of these sorghum sedans and things like that, for dairy animals, we really need to use brown midrib varieties. And the brown midrib is this part right here that we're talking about. And whether that's in sorghum sedans, or even in corns for corn silages, again, the brown midrib gene reduces lignin and increases digestibility. And you can see that as we compare some of the TDN values on some of these, we've got some, again, pretty good. One of the things you'll notice about warm season annual forages, and whether that's a teff grass or some of these sorghum sedans, they are not as high in crude protein. So we can't have those make up maybe 100% of the forage unless we have certainly adequate supplementation for some extra protein in the diet. These traditional sorghum sedans, you see here, lower in protein, lower in energy versus a BMR sorghum. But nonetheless, that in itself probably is not going to be a high enough quality forage to have good intakes and enough protein to contribute as much to the diet. So we have to keep that in mind when we're putting the diets together. One of the things that we also do need to think about in putting some of these sorghum sedans in is that there is the risk of prussic acid poisoning. I do know some producers, whether it's dairy or beef, will not even want to take a chance with some of these because of that risk. Certainly, if it's wilted, drought situation, frost, or when it's less than 18 inches tall, that risk for prussic acid is definitely higher and just has got to be prevented from happening. And I've heard a couple horror stories of people losing animals, a lot of animals, grazing in the fall, regrowth, or some things like that on these sorghums. So that has to be guarded. However, they can be harvested as silages and can make some very good heifer kind of feed. One of the other ones that Mary talked about was the turnips and some of the situations with that, the high sulfur contents. But look at, one, the crude protein content, and if we look at whether it's small grains or some other things, turnips brings a higher protein, very digestible, lower in NDF, low in lignin, and pretty high in energy. So turnips make a nice addition. We plant them in several places with the oats for the fall, and they are a good balance for those. You do have to be careful. We just use a couple pounds in a mix, There's a lot of seeds and they can grow very well. But we also might, suggest watching certainly an adaptation to those. Don't let them overeat on those. And that can be milk cows, or that could be heifers and dry cows, maybe a little better suited, but certainly some cautions to be taken there as well. Here's an example of some mixes we put together, and these have anywhere from 10 to 20 different species in the mix. And we planted this particular mix 4 had a lot of stuff in it. We had 20 different things in it. We wanted to see if we gained much, and then we also planted it at 10, 20, or 30 pounds to the acre. And we did have increasing yields when we put that into a cover crop mix for the fall. Notice, because of the legumes that are in the mix, we had some pretty good crude proteins. There's annual grasses in this, annual ryegrass for one thing. So this made some really good grazing fall forage. And still, if you can get a ton of dry matter and be able to graze it. Now, some years we've been fortunate. In Minnesota, we don't always get to graze till the 1st of December, but we did in a couple of these cases. Here's a couple other ones that you may have heard about. And what I wanted to do was show, certainly a lot of us will turn animals out on corn fields to help them glean through. And in some cases, we can utilize some cover crops in addition to corn stalk feeding. We can put them on the cover crop grazing in the day and then bring them back and put them onto the corn stalks for the overnight, because we can balance then how rich and how much they need of that cover crop, because it can be pretty high quality, pretty high protein. They don't need it 24 hours a day. We can utilize it and balance it with corn stalks. And that can be true actually whether or a dairy situation. Forage peas, we have often put that in into mixes, and I am actually losing some of my interest in using forage peas because I have found that they really don't increase yields when we have them in mixes with small grains, and it really doesn't do a whole lot for improving forage quality. And you can see that at 60 days, forage peas are going downhill in protein, and they just don't have a lot of TDN. Actually, not much better than corn stalks and leaves, things like that. So nothing there. Crimson clover and berseem clover are two clovers that are actually warm season clovers, and they're annuals. So it's a little different than our red clovers and our white clovers that we think about normally. They grow very nicely in the warm weather. They were originally, used more down south. We can put them into cover crop mixes, and if we want to graze them into the fall, and they will freeze out and die by spring. So certainly they do offer some forage quality. Let's see. So moving on to just some other things, in addition to we're going to manage these cover crops, and we really do need to get an idea what is out there, what animals we use, and typically you can do some figuring and do some measurements. You think 200-300 pounds per inch of growth out there, and they can utilize about half of that. The rest gets trampled. Now, trampled doesn't necessarily mean wasted, because we're providing cover. We're also providing biomass. We're also trapping some of the nutrients, especially like nitrogen. And so that is some of the things that we have to think about as well. But think about if we're going to have different size animals, there still will have like 2.5% of their body weight needed as forage and can be done. So if it's a 500-pound animal, a 1,000-pound animal, or a 1,500-pound animal, you can see that we can have differing requirements, different amounts consumed, but may be able to put more animals or less animals, but we need to think about some of those. And if you're going to have a pasture, whatever, think about, again, height, density, ways to utilize that. Do some calculations on how long they can be out there. Some of it can be just visual, but yet if you want to get the value out of grazing some of those cover crops, think about, not just turning them out of the whole 20-acre field. Do some cross fencing, give them an acre a day or some things like that, move them back to the corn stalks, stuff like that. It's a little more time, a little more management. Do we have time to do that? Well, you'll have to take that, think for that, for yourself, and whether that is the payback you want versus everything else we try to get done in the fall. But again, if we just turn them out on the 20 acres, animals go to their favorite places and we don't tend to utilize it as well. And maybe for cover crops, we don't have as much invested, so we're not as worried about it. But yet, if we want to pay back on that, economics of doing it, we should think about it. I run into this more with our pasturing dairies, and it certainly is something to think about. But pasture-based dairy cows have less milk yield, usually due to reduced dry matter intake than actually the forage they're consuming. So if we can only grow so much forage, if we're short on forage, we're short on acres, we just have to think about how we can best do that. When we have animals out on on fields in the fall and things like that, or in the spring, dry matter intake, it's very difficult to measure, but you have as a rule of thumb, it's going to be somewhere around 2.5 to 4%. And that is really somewhat driven by, the number of plants, the height, how long are they out there. But one thing we want is we want them eating a full mouthful every time they bite. And that's one of the things that tends to limit animal growth, animal performance is if we got them out there, we want them taking full mouthfuls when they bite. And that will make a difference in their dry matter intake. So let's start wrapping this up and think about cover crops, and Mary covered a lot of these things, but do we want to try to get some grazing out of it? Do we want to try to utilize this in a system where it's going to add to our forage supply? We're going to look at a place that we can fit in manure into our systems, and then think about how we can do this. And then how much cost do you want to put into this? Cereal rye in itself, you might have $10, $15. I have put together some seed mixes that I've looked at that could be $50 an acre for seed. And if we're going to spend that much money, then we definitely need to look at as many different benefits. And we get root growth and tremendous things there. Saw those cereal rye roots that were so deep. Radish do the same thing. Those tap roots go down deep. They bring up minerals and things like that. So there are added benefits, but certainly with some expense, we want to get a payback. So one of the things too is that if we're going to have these forages and stuff, let's think about, if we're not going to graze them, how are we going to harvest them? Are we going to make haylage, silage, in the spring? Can we make baleage? I have producers I work with that utilize some of the cover crops as late as November, doing a harvest, bagging it. Maybe they're going to make baleage. It's very difficult, as Mary said, that stuff doesn't dry, but maybe we can make some baleage out of it and preserve it very nicely, feed it up through the winter, some different situations. So think about that. So be observant when you're going to be doing these. Are there ways to manage our cover crops? Over time, you'll find year after year, you'll gain experience, you'll see greater values. Greater values after 3-4 years of those roots and what that's been doing. how it could fit into our forage chain, and just some different things, make some notes and learn about them. The other thing is be flexible, and utilize it for grazing, or how you can put some of these things together and start making a plan. But don't be so tied that you can't try something different. And a plan, not a law. So do that. And so with that, I think we'll just get to the end and utilize, some question and answer time might be more valuable. Any questions?
Thank you, Jim. There are some questions and discussion that was on the chat. So I'm going to start at the top and work my way down. Mary did a great job of addressing questions as we went. So D. Mertens asked, to get a 30-inch root, do you think you were getting growth over winter, or that's what it had accomplished prior to winter? So I'll let Mary address that question.
Well, I think it's a great question, and I don't actually know the answer, but I do think it's probably more of a combination of what we got in the fall with those roots growing later into the fall than the top growth itself, and then it starting with root growth earlier again than top growth, because I think roots can grow at lower temperatures than the top can. So I don't know that it grew all winter, but I do think it grew later and earlier than we would observe just looking at the top growth.
Thanks, Mary. If you have any questions, feel free to pipe in at any time, but I'm going to continue on down the chat. And actually, Mary, since these are mostly your comments, I'll just let you do some follow-up regarding to Jim's presentation.
Oh, I was just echoing a lot of what Jim had to say. I think he had some really great comments when you're thinking about using cover crops for forage. One comment he made was actually thinking about when you have those old alfalfa stands or old hay stands that you may be considering planting to something else the next year. One of the things we've been doing with old alfalfa stands have been going in the late August and killing those out. Just Roundup, for instance, and then planting a fall cover crop and being able to get more fall forage production off of that land. So I think that was a great concept he brought up, and one that has been working in Nebraska quite well. In particular, with his comment about using baleage as an opportunity to use some of that fall forage, I thought that was also a great point. That if you can't graze or don't want to graze heifers, there may be still an opportunity to capitalize on that forage source. As I showed you, harvesting those cover crops don't negate many of the benefits of cover crops, in particular if you harvest higher. So maybe cutting at 4 inches rather than cutting at 2 inches to allow for some ground cover. The other comments I made was relative to forage quality. I think Jim had made a comment about Nebraska's being very, very high quality, and I tried to show you that as well. Basically, you can think about them as being like a concentrate, high energy, high protein, and so I thought his bringing up that point was very, very germane. And we're talking about just the leaves themselves. The bulbs are also very high energy, but the leaves are also very highly digestible. So if you're looking at rape or kale, which has no bulb, you still need to think about it like a concentrate, not like a forage per se. His comment about peas was also a good one. We have a little bit of data that'll be in our next beef report, but we also did not see substantial benefits to adding peas or many legumes into these mixes. They're not adding yield, and you do get a little bit of boost in crude protein with some of them, but the radishes and turnips are a lot cheaper per pound of dry matter and still provides you that protein. So I just wanted to point that out.
I think those are really good comments, Mary. Again, these legumes, when we put those in the mix, they get a lot of attention because they're supposed to be fixing nitrogen. But any biomass that we grow above the ground is going to add some nitrogen to a system from that forage growth. But one thing about those, anytime we're looking at legumes, they tend to be the most expensive seed that we're putting into a mix. We just have to be conscious of that, and do we need to add that added cost?
And the other thing that I would point out is you really need to think about how much time you have for them to grow and how much nitrogen is in the soil. Legumes are lazy. If there's nitrogen available, they're not going to create those associations with the bacteria and fix nitrogen. So then if you're in a situation where legumes might be a benefit, you're probably limiting your forage growth. So I think there's things to consider when you're thinking about adding a legume. The other one is time. How much time do you have for it to grow and be able to fix nitrogen? If you're in a short window, you're probably not going to get the benefit that you need to make the cost worth it.
I agree. Yep. And the better way to put nitrogen into your system, whatever, is have that forage growth of some of those other things. And if you're grazing them earlier, harvest them earlier, or otherwise, again, their function as fixing nitrogen is going to be somewhat limited.
Yeah, I think your point is that keep the nitrogen you have in the system instead of letting it get out of the system, i.e., planting these other crops can keep that nitrogen in the soil profile or put it into the plant material. You then graze, it goes back out into the soil, and it's not leaching through the soil and ending up in the groundwater or in surface water.
Yeah.
Great points. Does anybody have any other questions or discussion? All right. Well, hearing none, thank you to both our speakers, Dr. Mary Dranowski from the University of Nebraska-Lincoln and Jim Paulson from the University of Minnesota, for talking about cover crops and grazing and dairy rations today. Thank you for all those who participated, and I will get this recording on YouTube, and we'll get the link sent out so anyone who was not able to join us can view this at a later date. Have a good day, everyone, and thanks again.
Thank you, Kim.